by the fact that I blasted your sub box late last week with over 20 videos all at once, and the fact that I used the exact same intro in each video that stated as much, you've probably gathered that I attended the Dawntrail media tour and tested out each of the jobs, including the 2 new ones. The EU tour had a super tight deadline in terms of the amount of time we had to produce our content before the embargo lifted. Like, I had a little over 4 days in total, so my media tour coverage isn't quite over yet. I covered the job changes and gave my quick impressions on what they meant going forward, but now that I've had a few days to decompress and really think, I'm ready to discuss how I feel about Dawntrail job design on the whole, role by role, in detail. As a little note, everything we saw is completely subject to change. In fact, there has never been an expansion where nothing changed from Media Tour build to release, so I'm absolutely sure by the time early access hits there will be a swathe of at least small alterations from the build that I got to test, potencies especially. This video is sponsored by FFXIV. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. I'm a healer main, so let's discuss those first because I have quite a lot to say. Healers on the whole weren't slated to change too drastically aside from Astrologian with its purported rework. When I actually got in there and played around for a while, even Ast changed a lot less than I was expecting. The card system was revamped from its current endwalker state, diversifying the cards away from being purely DPS centric and somehow managing to increase the number of buttons that Ast players will regularly press. White Mage, Scholar and Sage all remained practically untouched aside from a few new additions to their kit, but those additions are both interesting and expansive to their potential in Raid. Firstly, how do I feel about the new Astro cards? Honestly, I have mixed impressions on the whole. One of the key issues with healing right now are that healers have too many tools, and almost every piece of content in the game neither requires nor incentivizes you to use them properly. Astro has so many instant AoE and single target tools available to them, and even before we look at the card rework, they'll be receiving more in the form of things like a 3rd stack of Essential Dignity. What ends up happening, even in Ultimates right now, is that especially with your single target OGCD heals, the damage just isn't there to require them to all be smartly used, so you just sit on them for extended periods of time, occasionally throwing one on the tank when they sequentially take a bunch of auto attacks. They feel superfluous and low impact, and it's rare that you get a usage that feels super important and helpful. With 4 of the altered card effects being focused around mitigation and restoration, with the function of providing or buffing the ability to provide EHP on the bar of the target, likely the tank, what makes these any different to the 10 plus tools Astro already has? Those same tools they often don't need to fully utilize. This is my biggest concern on the whole with the card system. The high knowledge requirement of optimal card play has been drastically reduced, but the overall feeling of Ast has remained, and that the burst windows are still looking to be fun, that's all totally fine. And the unmatched healing portfolio of the job was also untouched, keeping it really engaging to perform on. But if the encounter design doesn't support these reworked cards, then I am sad to say that I have to label them categorically less interesting than their endwalker predecessors. But what are the solutions? Well, there's 2 really. Firstly is to diversify the card effects and make them a little more wacky and unique. Instead of simple, this one's a regen, this one's a shield effects, diversify them a little further and really play into the job fantasy that Astro has. Let me give you an example or 2. How about a card that places a buff on an ally of choice, and after 15 seconds that buff will expire, causing a very short range but pretty strong AoE heal centered on the target and anyone close to them. We're playing into both the time mage and the pre-planning ideology you'll find all across Astro's kit, and adding a cool new heal that you don't have anywhere else in your arsenal that can be situationally very useful if you use it right. It's also more multifaceted than purely a single target heal, because if you use it on the right person at the right time thanks to your planning, you gain that AoE heal on the surrounding targets. Here's another one. It places a buff on a person and will provide a percentage of mitigation to the target, which will scale based on the number of seconds before they take damage. So if you put a card on them and they get hit 1 second later, it gives you a 1% mitigation for the rest of its duration. If you put it on them and it takes 14 seconds to be hit, you'll get 14% mitigation. Because it still lasts for 15 seconds, you have this interesting paradigm of deciding between playing it right before a hit and getting a small mitigation for a long duration, or pre-playing it early to get a higher percentage mitigation for what is in essence a lower number of incoming attacks. These are just off the top of my head too. There are absolutely a number of interesting effects that could be tested or implemented. The second solution is related to fight design. Fights need to hit harder in terms of single target on tanks, or offer more mechanics that will properly utilize single target spot healing in more cases than just fixing low rolls or correcting another player's mistakes. On the plus side regarding this, at the Media Tour, Yoshida directly stated that the Square Enix team plans to be bolder in terms of their mechanical design and to be less afraid of failure, instead experimenting and creating things they believe will wow players. This to me speaks volumes to his intent to create more unique mechanics and more mechanics that affect different roles in different ways. Seeing as they're very clearly aware of a level of stagnation in elements of their combat design, I'd imagine this also includes the challenges that tanks face, and hopefully making more unique tank busters or auto attack patterns, or even mechanics for tanks to deal with that will burn through their cooldowns and require them to receive a little more triage. One interesting aside is that assuming Astro's raid DPS contribution is on par with the other healers, which honestly it seems it probably will be, and I have no doubts it'll be absolutely equitable, especially when we consider how much more potency other party members will be able to dump into Divination and those cards next expansion compared to now, it raises the question, isn't Astro kind of OP in terms of its healing kit, even more so than it was in Endwalker? Astro also currently has a pretty challenging mana economy due to their drastically decreased number of draws, but no new sources of MP generation. My expectation is that by launch it'll be a simple case of buffing the amount of mana that Astral Draw and Umbral Draw provide, and the issue will be immediately rectified. I'm not too worried about that personally. Speaking of things that are an issue now, and will surely be fixed by release, but I want to raise them just in case, a couple of skills like Macrocosmos, Pneuma, and Toxicon all didn't get their potencies updated to match the damage dealt by generic filler spells like Dosis and Malefic, rendering them, well, not very good at the moment. This is almost certainly one of those Media Tour oversights that will be rectified in double checking before early access goes live, so again, not too worried about it. So, with Astro, I'm on the whole kind of reserving my judgment until I get to play it in the Extremes and Savage thing. The dungeon I got to try out just wasn't enough to get a full picture of how it'll act in Dawntrail itself. Looking at the other three healers and the direction they've taken with healing on the whole is the next topic. White Mage, Scholar, and Sage didn't change much from their level 90 iterations whatsoever. Instead of shifting up their basis, they just gained some fun new toys to play around with. Interestingly, all four healers gained at least one new skill to press that deals damage. There is a distinction between what I call active and passive buttons. Passive buttons are those cooldowns that you just instantly hit when they become available, and there you go, job done. Whereas active buttons are ones that are either always available, and you need to discern the right places to use them, such as DPS abilities with multiple charges, for example, or dot and debuff type abilities that require some kind of upkeep. While this new addition is what I'd call a passive DPS ability, this is in my opinion a very positive addition, which if received well could pave the way to healers getting a tiny bit more in 8.0. So please make sure if you do want to see a wider DPS kit on healers, to express that you like the additions and you want to see more of them. One thing I'd like to touch on is Eucrasian Dyscrasia, the new AoE dot that Sage received. This is my unexpected favourite from Dawntrail, assuming it creeps its way into release unaltered, because it is a DPS gain on single target by a very small amount and provides a unique debuff to that from your standard dot. This is actually exactly what I've been begging for healers to receive for quite a while mostly. An attack that provides a DPS gain for when you use it wisely, and that gain is small enough that the average player doesn't feel forced into toying with it constantly. There is an element of risk reward because it only becomes a DPS gain right at the end with that final tick, so if you don't have a good level of knowledge with the fight, whether the boss is going to leave or not, you risk just wasting your time by using it at all. This is what I want for healers. An extra thing to manage that will provide you small gains at the expense of diverting your attention. That's a lot of fun to me, and I hope that the way this spell is designed at the moment is not only intentional, but that the other healers get some kind of equitable upkeep skill in the future as well. Another thing that I find pretty interesting is White Mage getting that gap closer too. further solidifying the fact that SE are designing White Mage and Sage to be the easy mobile healers of their respective archetypes, whereas Scholar and Astro are lumped in with one another as more complex offerings. The level 100 pinnacle abilities of each of the healers are also pretty interesting. Each one of them is an OGCD healing or mitigation tool, two of which are bespoke and have their own keys, the other two being combo buttons off of pre-existing healer buttons. Divine Caress for White Mage is an AoE shield, followed by an AoE regen, and using this ability at all is a combo action off of Temperance. Sunsign is Astro's level 100, another AoE damage reduction to complement their arsenal, this one being a combo coming off of Neutral Sect. Sage gets Philosophia, increasing healing magic potency and automatically restoring health to the party after each GCD for a period of time, and lastly, Scholar gets that crazy fairy stance we saw from the job action trailer in Seraphism. This transforms your Adlo and Consultation to stronger versions temporarily, makes them an instant cast, reduces the ED tactics cooldown to 1 second, and also provides an AoE regen for a period. What's interesting about these new skills as a collective is that they are either multifaceted in their capabilities, or they are combo actions off of other abilities that make them very elastic in their value as a pair. Both shield healers got buffs to their throughput capabilities, and both pure healers received enhancements to their group mitigation. It feels like what's essentially happening is the Dawntrail healing additions are specifically there to shore up weaknesses that each of the healers currently possesses, making them more capable of interacting with one another more effectively in different comps, and put you in a situation where you never really feel like one of the healers is just unable to deal with incoming heal checks or mechanics. Between any pair of healers, now there should always be a way. I think the pure healer additions are fairly simple and obvious, but let's talk a little bit more about the Scholar and Sage level 100s because I think they're worth delving deeper into. Both provide you a passive AoE regen in essence, and the potency of Sage's far outclassing what Seraphism offers when you aren't investing in GCD heals, but Scholar really comes into its own when you are in progression or recovery situations. The throughput and mitigation you can pump out, whilst moving, across a short period of time is just categorically unmatched. Because of this, it's really difficult to say that Scholar just isn't going to be king when it comes to Savage progression for the first Dawntrail tier. I know at least I am fully planning on playing it, unless there's drastic changes going through to release. So these are some scattered thoughts on the healers, focusing on the parts that were most interesting to me personally, but on the whole, I feel that a lot of the changes healers got were positive on the whole. I've spoken about healers in depth in the past, so many already know that this isn't as extreme as the changes I was hoping to see, that Square Enix have firmly placed themselves on the tracks in that direction, and I couldn't be happier. This video is sponsored by FFXIV, and rather than reel off a dozen brand safe reasons as to why you should invest, I thought I'd instead just show you about my experience with their premium standing desk, the E7, through the lens of my 8-year-old phone camera. I have always wanted to try out a standing desk, so I was actually really excited when they asked if I wanted to test out one of theirs. When it arrived, the first wow moment was seeing how massive the desktop itself was. It wasn't just longer than my old desk, the surface itself was so much wider. I went for the black finish, but there's a multitude of nice surface options, mahogany, bamboo, maple, even colour frame palettes as well, so you can fit it into basically any background nicely. After about 30 minutes of building and a surprisingly pain-free time getting it all together, I got to play around with it a little bit. It comes with a control panel which can control the desk height via the touch of a button, and it also includes a couple of buttons for you to create presets of your favourite levels of elevation, instantly allowing you to shift from sitting to standing with no hassle at all. It's even got a USB port to charge your phone with. It's quiet, sturdy, exudes quality, and honestly, I'm still figuring out what to do with all this extra desk space. Right now, it's mostly a venue to show off my media tour tidbits, so if you want to try out a FFXIV yourself, you can use my link in the description, and thank you to them so much once more for sponsoring this video. Next, let's look at tanks, and honestly, maybe disappointingly to you, I don't have an absolute ton to say about them, because they just didn't change an absolute ton. The current status quo of tank design is staying practically untouched, Balance may change due to potency adjustments, but in terms of how they play, the greatest shift is in the reduction of weaving of some jobs, namely Gunbreaker and Dark Knight. This gives them a lot more space to hit their defensives without extensive planning during moments like 2-minute windows, which definitely makes playing them a lot easier. For me personally, I really enjoy jobs that have extremely busy periods. I find it super fun and satisfying to get everything off correctly, so I'm a little bit sad to see that reduced, but it's not going to make me not want to play the jobs or anything like that. What is really interesting about tanks though, honestly, is the fact that each of them received not one, but 2 buffs to their personal mitigation. Rampart was buffed across the board for every tank, and whilst the buff isn't some insanely huge one, it's definitely still noticeable. More crazily though, is the changes to each of the tank's 30% cooldowns. They're now 40% damage reductions instead, which on its own is an absolutely huge buff, but they now additionally come augmented with a passive, unique trait. Some of these buffs are staggering as well. A 1000 potency shield from Paladin, what the heck? Plus 20% total HP, healing that HP as well on Gunbreaker. These are nuts in what they provide to you in a raid setting. What all this really hints to, at least to me, is that there will likely be a reduction in the number of boring, samey swap busters that just do one hit, then you voke, then the other guy gets a hit, and that's it. These busters are just kind of used to leech some of your cooldowns away or bait out an invuln, but I feel that the amount of value they have in making combat interesting, unless they're also paired with other mechanics, is very, very low. What I want to see more of is busters where the trial isn't, can I mitigate one incoming hit by stacking everything and then swap, but more, how can I apply my cooldowns to survive this extended period of heavy attacks? Or how can I take 5 hits in a row and survive with my cooldowns and healer tools? More things like that are what I'd like to see. I have a funny feeling my wishes may just be getting granted. It's also interesting that tanks are receiving these enhanced defensives going into an expansion where Square Enix have stated they want to take more risks in terms of combat and encounter design, and where it's likely we will see more diversification in the responsibilities of each role in encounters again. I'm just so excited to see what they cook up. Aside from Warrior, the tanks all received what are in essence new skills that are direct upgrades from their old ones and don't alter their overall gameplay styles in doing so. Dark Knight got its new Delirium combo, Gunbreaker unlocked Reign of Beasts combo to replace the 3 burst strikes every 2-minute window, and Paladin gets an enhanced Atonement combo to bring it a little bit more visual variety. Warrior also got a nice little animation upgrade, which I thought was a very positive thing on their drastically underwhelming Inner Chaos. Aside from that, the changes were mostly just additional GCDs or OGCDs that directly combo off pre-existing features within the rotation. That's not to say they're bad. I for example think the Warrior Guard is really cool and fits into its kit perfectly, and Disesteem is awesome as well. I'm definitely always in favour of flashy new abilities that give us a little bit more to do in Burst. On the whole, I think the tank changes were okay. They're definitely not the worst thing in the world, and as somebody who has a decent amount of fun playing tanks right now, I know I'll still enjoy them a lot in Dawntrail too. But one thing I definitely have with tanks as a role at the moment is a nagging feeling that they're missing something. It's hard to quantify what that something is. I miss the stance dancing days of yore, but I understand why they're gone. I also understand, and for the most part agree with, why aggro as a mechanic has been dumbed down to the point of being close to a non-issue. It just wasn't interesting in the first place and just felt like an annoyance. But with both of them removed, tanks feel bare. Maybe more tank mechanics in fights alone is the simple fix needed. We'll have to wait and see. Now we move away from the supports and on to DPS. I think Caster is as good a place as any to begin because there's quite a lot to say on the whole. Because DPS jobs are so different from one another, and some with unique positives and negatives, I will probably go from job to job here and talk about the points and additions that I find interesting, rather than features added to the role as a whole. Summoner in Function only really got one single OGCD every 2 minutes that is new as a part of their damaging rotation, and otherwise they're practically untouched. This is the first of the 9 jobs we've discussed so far that I can categorically say I'm disappointed in. I think that Endwalker Summoner is mildly uninteresting, but I don't hate it. It's an easy, comfortable job that you don't really need to think on even in Savage and Ultimate, rendering it a safe pick to get comfortable with mechanics on. What I was really hoping for in Dawntrail was something that would spice the job up and make it a little bit more on par with other DPS jobs in terms of engagement. What we got was essentially a reskin with buffed potencies, an OGCD and a couple of upgrades. I think that's a shame. Lunar Bahamut is cool aesthetically, I'm not going to deny that, but I personally don't think that Summoner is in a solid enough position to be able to rest on its laurels in 7.0 like some of the other jobs can. I was hoping for more basically. I've seen posts from people stating that they are expecting a whole new suite of primals for the odd minute phases and things like that. My expectations were not that lofty. The biggest thing that I wanted was either a 4th primal, meaning you could cut one primal phase short each minute based on movement or mechanic parameters, giving you a lot more decision making, or some kind of buff to upkeep during your cycles. One thing I mentioned offhand before the media tour as an option was that I'd love to see you gain a buffed version of the first primal you summon in each cycle, and that buff would be unique to each primal, so your first summon would be used based on which individual buff you wanted to obtain for that 1 minute window. I quite liked something like that as a concept. If we don't see a larger push in 8.0 Summoner, I'm going to be sorely disappointed, because I just don't think the job is super fun right now. Red Mage I have the least to say about in this category because it also didn't change very drastically, but unlike Summoner, I think it's already in a pretty healthy spot. Red Mage is designed very well, and the meme about them just getting extra finishes every expansion is partly because Square Enix did such a good job the first time with it. I do think Grand Impact is quite interesting though, and it influences your thought process during the rotation more than I initially expected any Red Mage edition to do. One of the main points of optimization with the Red Mage is aligning your natural dual cast timings with the cooldown of Flesh and Contra 6. Melee combos being shorter than the GCD will shift your dual cast once more, and you'd use tools like Acceleration and Swift Cast to fix that after each melee combo. Grand Impact messes with that a little, making it so that you either need to time it more precisely or rely more heavily on Swiftcast. Cool little change, and I'm in favour of them having a new thing to focus on. Black Mage is a hot topic in the 14 community right now thanks to its purported adjustments. I'm not going to run through all of them because there are quite a few, but the crux of the changes hinges upon non-standard rotations being systematically dismantled in their current form, and the addition of the new gauge which allows the casting of Flare Star after 6 Fire 4s or 2 flares within a single Astral Fire cycle. People aren't too happy, and the cursed rotations that have resulted from the preliminary information are equal parts really funny and really a sign that some of the implications of the adjustments haven't been fully intended by the Square Enix team, I think. I like Black Mage a lot, I like it in Endwalker, and honestly I like the Dawntrail version too. I'm pretty decent at standard Black Mage, and I know some of the basic non-standard stuff, and that's enough for me to occasionally take it into Savage or Ultimate and perform acceptably. That's good enough for me. What's really interesting about 7.0 Black Mage is that it is simultaneously raising the skill floor and lowering the skill ceiling. I'm not sure that's quite what they meant to do. Now more than ever, you will be punished for making a rotational failure by your damage absolutely tanking. Before, if you messed up during your Astral Fire cycle, you would usually just cut a Fire 4 and everything would be fine. Your cost for your mistake is the damage from that Fire 4, but now the consequences are much higher. If you drop a Fire 4 now, you lose your whole Flare Star as well, your highest hit aside from Xenoglossy. That's kind of weird to me, because usually the point of a lot of these changes are to lower the ceiling a little bit while still keeping them as approachable and friendly to newcomers as possible. Sharpcast and the Thunder changes seem to be in service of this, so why are the Fire alterations so punishing? I honestly expect by the time 7.0 releases, or at the latest in the Savage patch, we will see at least some small adjustments to Black Mage to rectify this. For those hoping for a full rollback, that's neither realistic nor honestly a good idea, but I think we might see either Ice Paradox returning or the capability to keep your accrued Flare Star progress even when swapping into Umbral Ice. Basically, small changes that will make it easier for the lower end player, and their existence in turn will provide slightly more in the way of options for the very experienced Black Mage main. Now I get to talk about my favourite job at the media tour, Pictomancer. Before we delve in, I know it's not looking super hot based on preliminary potencies. We're going to be fine, don't worry. Gameplay wise though, this job was fantastic fun in my play session. I loved it. I think that dealing with multiple cast bars and managing a limited portfolio of movement tools are one of the most engaging things about casters in this game, and Pictomancer does that at its best. It has extended casts in the form of the murals and muses themselves, and you'll regularly be applying and executing them and preparing both the weapon and landscape murals for your 2-minute raid buffs, and then in between you'll be building your black and white paint stacks which have shorter casts, and using your movement tools and swift casts in between for when you need to quickly traverse the arena. Pictomancer has a bunch of different resources and things to manage, but all of them are very simple to understand and just within a short period, and I think once players actually get it in their hands, it's going to click very nicely. Honestly, this is one of the most fun new jobs for me personally in maybe forever. I just hope it stands the test of time beyond the short dummy session I initially got, and that I get to keep feeling that spark of joy when playing for as long as possible. Seeing as I just got done discussing magical range DPS, we might as well move on next to physical range DPS. They're much less spoiled cousins. In what I'm almost certain will be the shortest section of the entire video, let's look at Dancer, Machinist and Bard. So none of the ranged changed much at all to preface this conversation. Machinist got a second stack of drill, a chainsaw combo which deals the same damage as every other tool, some animation and potency upgrades and the American button. Really all this means in reality is that now you're probably not going to be pressing your 1-2-3 basic combo in your opener at all, because you have 5 million tools to throw out and then your Full Metal Machinist and upgraded Hypercharge in your Wildfire before your basic rotation even begins. That'll be fun and flashy for sure, and I'm really looking forward to doing it, but in essence nothing really changes. I know Machinist mains have a few gripes with the job design on the whole, one of which being the fact that Wildfire cannot direct hit crit, and whilst that doesn't seem to be changing, for me personally I enjoy the job a lot, so I'm not sad to see it remain mostly intact. Dancer also didn't really change at all, receiving what is essentially a Talana clone in function in the form of finishing step, a couple of flashy upgrades and so on. Dancer suffers from many of the issues that jobs added in Shadowbringers and onwards do, in that their initial iteration was just really well designed and practically feature complete, and there's nothing really to add without it being superfluous fluff. So what they add is just that, fluff, to make it feel like the job got something new. Dancer at its core plays very well, and it's kind of unique within FF14 jobs in terms of gameplay, so I kind of give it a pass when it gets to these relatively weak new additions. Bard didn't change too much, once more. I know I'm sounding like a broken record in how you play it, moment to moment, but they finally fixed songs. This was the quality of life change I needed to be able to enjoy the job. They could have done literally nothing else other than the song change, and it would be better and more interesting than the changes that were made to Summoner. Honestly, one thing I do think is weird is that some jobs, like Dragoon for example, have issues with not being able to do their burst properly in their opener, and that was rectified in Dawntrail with the changes, and it's a great thing. Yet Bard on the other end of the spectrum doubled down by adding a new skill that scales its damage based on your number of possessed coda, of which you can still only have one in the opener. Honestly, the easiest solution is simply to make it so that your first song of a pull, or duty I suppose in the case of dungeons, gives you all 3 coda instead of 1. Problem solved. Really what I'm hoping for ranged as a role on the whole is that they receive a lot of love in 8.0. I imagine in that expansion we'll be getting a 4th range finally to make them equitable with most of the other roles, and I'm hoping the 3 pre-existing jobs are provided something that either makes them a little bit more interesting or desired by party members. Right now, ranged physical DPS for the most part hold onto their required party spot by being one of the providers of the coveted 5% party buff. Without that, I think their role might struggle a little more, and that's a real shame to see. Surely 8.0 is the expansion of the Fizz ranged. Surely I'm not coping. So now is the role with the largest variety of jobs at a whopping 6 come Dawntrail, melee DPS. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm mainly going to discuss the jobs that got significant changes. The newcomer Viper is one that I got to playtest for around half an hour at the media tour. Upon first glance it was deeply confusing, the tooltips endlessly long with repeated smatterings of coils and swift skins, and my eyes started glazing over before I could discern too much of value. But then I begun to hit the dummy. This job is easy, it just kind of works. It's made up of 4 individual components, each of which are very classic 14 and slot together nicely. You have your basic combo, bound to only 2 keys in total to build up gauge. You have a gem builder with a cooldown link to it and a gem spender, and then you can spend that painstakingly accrued gauge on reawakening and doing a super fast burst reminiscent of the Machinist and Reaper windows. That's the job. Completely. One thing I'm not sure that I like is the basic combo and how it works. You have 2 first hits, then 2 second hits, and then 4 third hits, and they all interlink and cross paths with one another, but it does so in a fairly automated way. Honestly, the only real agency you have aside from follow the glowies or what the job gauge tells you to do is to make sure you hit the correct first button based on if you need to upkeep your debuff or not. I just don't think this system is very interesting at all, even less so than the standard 1, 2, 3 that other jobs have. Maybe once I've had more time with it I'll learn to appreciate it more, but during my playtest I just wasn't a fan. What I did love, however, was the way weaving and OGCD procs work on the job. Use 'em or lose 'em double weaves on a job with a GCD speed comparable to Ninja is just, well, fun to manage. I also love how distinct the reawakening combo is in that it's on 5 different keys with 5 weaves in between. Viper is just really fast, and those parts are where it excels and comes into its own as a satisfying pick. On the whole, I'm just curious to see what it feels like in real encounters. Reaper, and because Viper and Reaper sound similar, I keep accidentally saying Reaper instead of Viper, which is making this recording take forever, but Reaper didn't change too much. It suffers from the same problems as Dancer in that it's a really good base, so I think it's tough to add too much interesting mechanically to it. So what they choose to do instead is to add some cool flashy things that don't affect the rotation very much. I get it, it's hard to heavily alter a solid basis without breaking what doesn't need fixing. What I would have liked to see for Reaper though, personally, is for the windows between bursts to be made a little bit more interesting because they're just so slow, and I want something more to keep me busy during those periods of time. Dragoon is my favourite melee in the game on the whole, and it was slated to be getting a major overhaul in 7.0. What we got is a lot less than I expected, but I'm overall happy with it because I like Dragoon. I think it's good and it fixed some of the awkward issues with the job. Mirage dives and Life of the Dragon being unlinked, honestly, just a good thing. I think janky jump tech could be cool, but for the most part it was just frustrating when your group played too well, especially in ultimate encounters, and I will not miss its removal. Burst windows are fantastic now too. We lost 2 Spine Shatter dives and Dragon Sight, but we gained 2 super cool OGCDs to replace them, and now you can use all of your Nostrons at will rather than specifically 10 seconds apart, and that's honestly a good change that actually makes Dragoon a bit more fun. I really don't have anything to say negatively about the new burst windows, except that it's kind of funny that Life Surge not only managed to survive, but also to keep 2 charges. Life Surge is just one of those weird skills that I keep expecting to get replaced or axed entirely, and it only gets stronger with every new piece of content. It's wild. I bet it survives all the way through to 10.0 at this point. One thing I don't feel negatively about, as that's happened on the whole and I'm just kind of used to it, but I would prefer if they remain untouched, is the overall reduction in positionals that Dragoon has gotten. I like positionals personally. I think they're a fun little challenge that keeps you active and that Square Enix has found a decent balance between encounters that use them and skip out on them. And thanks to Drakesbane, every combo is now -1 positional compared to before, and I just kind of enjoyed positionals. It's not going to drastically affect how much I appreciate the job, but I hope they don't go any further with this essentially. Monk also changed a lot, joining Ninja in being the 2 melee to gain an entirely new job gauge, despite not being touted for any kind of major rework. I think the Monk changes are fine, to be honest. I enjoy Monk now, and I'll enjoy Monk in Dawntrail. The pre-planning of your burst windows has definitely been reduced drastically. You don't need to concern yourself too hard with lining perfect balance up with a fresh demolish window. That just doesn't matter too much anymore. In fact, even the order of the 3 GCDs you press within that PB window is just not as important as it used to be. You have new GCDs within bursts such as Fire's Reply, which means that what's likely going to end up happening is you'll begin Perfect Balance just before Riddle of Fire and Brotherhood, so that you can fit both finishers in as well as your new toys. The variance with which the buttons you'd be pressing at any given time in your 1-2-3 combo now, in the building and expending of your fury, was way more active than any non-buff window rotation I've had to deal with in a long time, and I fully accept that it's possible that this is solely because I only got 20 minutes with the job, and that after a handful of hours it'll just click as easily and thoughtlessly as any other, but I at least was having a blast during the time I got. I was constantly keeping an eye on my gauge and switching up my next combo, and I never quite felt like I got into a mindless rhythm as you did with a monk in the past. As a side note though, I do acknowledge that stuff like double dotting Demolish and the upkeep of both effects at once is now pretty much a thing of the past, but I'm okay with losing it if we get an interesting new job mechanic to make up for it. I'm gonna pair Samurai and Ninja up honestly, because neither of them changed too much at all. Ninja got a whole ass new job gauge and its gameplay style still barely changed whatsoever. Now you just build and spend Kazematoi through changing your 1-2-3 combos rather than using Armor Crush to upkeep Huton. This change is good because Huton sucked and wasn't fun whatsoever, especially at lower level regions. I think Ninja is one of the best design jobs in the game, honestly, despite it actually being one of my least favourite to play. It's kind of easy, fast-paced, fun, and everything just kind of makes sense in tandem with one another. They doubled down on this, adding some fun new upgrades and a nuke coming off TCJ. Yeah, Ninja just is a win on the whole. It's just more Ninja, and that's good. Samurai is mostly untouched, but some of the alterations which they made are interesting, but whether they're positive or negative changes to how fun it'll be, I haven't decided yet. Now, you can Oni Tsubame Gaishi directly after a Meikyo, which to me was just kind of an odd choice. I guess it makes sense. It further removes some failure states for less experienced players. Job just didn't change too much on the whole aside from that, but my gosh does it look flashier than ever. If they gave an award to a job that has the most incredibly flashy non-change in Final Fantasy XIV history, Dawntrail Samurai has to take it. So yeah, that's my yapping session over. I'm pretty excited for the Dawntrail jobs on the whole, and Pictomancer was the absolute highlight for me, but I was also pretty happy with the adjustments that especially melee DPS received in general. They're all very fun to play, and what the Mediator experience did to me more than anything else was just really made me very hyped to play next expansion's content. The dungeon was really fun, and the job changes in general for almost every job are pretty satisfying. And in just a few days we're going to get the launch trailer and some more tantalizing information via the final pre-release live letter. I can't wait, honestly. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.